1973, and on a tranquil Tuesday afternoon on the Isle of Wight, the sun hung low in the sky, casting long, serene shadows over Sandown. The air was filled with the distant sounds of birds and the rustle of leaves, perfect for a leisurely playtime. Two children, a girl and a boy, were engrossed in their adventure near Lake Common. As they wandered, an unexpected, eerie wailing noise pierced the peaceful ambience, and it is described as being not unlike an ambulance siren. Intrigued and a bit anxious, the children decided to follow the sound. They traversed the golf links, their feet sinking slightly into the damp earth, and ventured through a thick hedge that separated the links from a secluded swampy meadow near the seldom used Sandown Airport. The closer they got, the louder and more insistent the wail became, until it suddenly ceased, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Crossing a wooden footbridge over a narrow brook, their eyes were drawn to a sudden movement. A blue-gloved, three-fingered hand emerged from beneath the bridge. The children froze, their hearts pounding in unison. A bizarre figure slowly surfaced, awkwardly fumbling with a book that it promptly dropped into the water, splashing around clumsily to retrieve it. The children watched, wide-eyed and breathless, as this strange being moved with a peculiar hopping motion, raising its knees high with each step. The figure made its way back into a metallic hut, a structure reminiscent of construction site offices, but notably windowless. The children, now more curious than scared, observed from a distance of about 50 yards, it's about 150 feet, the figure reappearing, this time carrying a microphone connected to a white flex. As it spoke into the device, the wailing noise returned, louder and more intense. The boy was overwhelmed by the piercing sound and he began to run, but the girl, driven by curiosity and bravery, held her ground. "Hello? Are you still there?" The figure's voice, amplified by the microphone, was surprisingly clear even at such a distance, and friendly too, despite this odd situation. This friendly tone emboldened the girl to approach, waving her hesitant friend to follow. As they got closer, they saw the figure in greater detail. It was an imposing presence, nearly 7 feet tall, with no discernible neck. Its head seemed to be set directly onto its shoulders. It wore a bizarre yellow pointed hat that interlocked seamlessly with the red collar of its green tunic. Atop the hat sat a round black bauble, and on either side wooden antennae jutted out. The face was a patchwork of strange features, triangular markings for eyes, a brown square for a nose, and yellow lips that never moved. The cheeks bore additional round markings, and a fringe of red hair adorned its forehead. Wooden slats protruded from the sleeves of its tunic and from beneath its white trousers. Its feet were bare and only had 3 toes each. The figure then wrote something in a notebook and pointed to the words as it wrote them. "Hello, and I am all colours, Sam," it wrote, in large, uneven letters. The girl, still filled with curiosity, read the words aloud, noting that they were not in conventional order, which added to the surreal nature of this encounter. The figure then began speaking directly, without the microphone, though its lips remained motionless. The voice was unclear, akin to someone speaking without fully opening their mouth. It asked questions of the children, which prompted them to ask some in return. They asked about its ripped clothing, to which it responded that it only had one set of clothes, so it could only wear those. They inquired about its human-like appearance and asked if it was a human. The entity chuckled and said, "No," in reply. When asked if it was a ghost, the figure vaguely replied, "Well, Not really, but I am in an odd sort of way. They asked, well, what are you then? And it simply replied, you know. The being stated that there were in fact others of its kind, and it drew a rough sketch of one of them. It also said that it was frightened of people, because they might hurt the being, and that if it were attacked, it would not fight back. The entity also said that it had no name. The figure invited the children to crawl through a flap into its hut. Inside they found a 2-levelled space. The lower level, with ample headroom, was wallpapered in blue-green and covered with a pattern of dials. It also contained an electric heater and some simple wooden furniture. The upper level had less space and a metallic floor. The figure explained that it fed on berries collected in the late afternoon and indicated that it had a camp on the mainland. It also mentioned that the river water was drinkable once cleaned. Once inside, the figure removed its hat, revealing round, white ears and sparse brown hair. It performed a curious trick by placing a berry in its ear and then thrusting its head forward and making the berry disappear, only for it to reappear at its eye and then move to its mouth. The children were fascinated and bewildered by this odd performance. After spending over half an hour with the enigmatic being, the children said their goodbyes and rushed back across the golf links. Breathless and wide-eyed, they recounted their tale to the first adult they encountered, who just laughed dismissively. The children told this man that they'd seen a ghost. Undeterred, the girl later told her father, detailing every aspect of the encounter with unwavering conviction. Her father, initially sceptical, was taken aback by the consistency and detail in her account. He even spoke to the boy, who confirmed the story, despite being less articulate. Both kids said that what they'd seen was either a ghost or a man dressed up. They also stated that there were 2 workmen nearby who behaved as if they couldn't even see this whole performance, like the thing was perhaps invisible. Days later, the girl's father visited the spot but found no trace of the metallic hut or the strange figure. Despite the lack of physical evidence, the vivid and detailed nature of the children's account left him pondering the reality of this encounter. This tale was recounted in Volume 6 of the Bufora Journal in 1978 and was offered up by someone identifying himself only as Mr. Y. The article was written by a Norman Oliver. It's prefaced with a paragraph that suggests that the story is not necessarily the full and unedited version, but there is, somewhere in the background, a very complete dossier of information regarding the encounter. Mr. Y was the father of the girl in question, and in 1970 and 1972 he had his own weird encounters. In 1970, Mr. Y was driving from Shanklin to Ryde via Seaview to visit a friend, and while passing through the village of Brading, he turned right towards St Helens and noticed a large, multi-lit aircraft to his right, approximately halfway between the road and Bembridge Downs. The object, appearing enormous, flew low over swampy terrain. He stopped his car to observe it. The object hovered aimlessly over the swampy edges of the River Yare, displaying a wide ring of 7 or more lights. Each light was a large, clearly defined sphere, described as like a bright red cherry, interspersed with turquoise and white lights, and no sound was heard. As Mr. Y continued driving, the object flew parallel to him. Once outside St Helens, it crossed about 300 yards behind him and descended slowly, meandering above distant hedges, with the red lights now reduced to 4 and rotating slowly. Mr. Y stopped again, using his torch to signal for about 10 minutes, during which the object weaved back and forth without settling. He then continued to his destination. Upon arrival, the red lights were still visible, so he left his rear lights on to face the object. When his friends came out, they both saw the object playing hide-and-seek between the treetops. As Mr. Y continued to ride, the lights eventually disappeared from view. And then between 9 and 10 p.m. on March the 1st, 1972, Mr. Y found himself compelled to travel to the cliffside at Compton Bay, intrigued by an unexpected tidal surge, which seemed to be partly caused by a droning underwater craft. From his position, he noticed 2 yellow points of light that appeared like the eyes of a monstrous sea creature. He estimated that these eyes were about 40 feet away and just below the sea surface, resembling a periscope. The lights eventually disappeared and the tide subsided. He never mentioned any of this to his daughter. So what on earth was this odd entity? Well, one point that often gets mentioned inaccurately is that the entity refers to itself as Sam. This name's been attached to the entity, but if you look closely at the report, it does mention that the entity says it does not have a name. The phrase, "Hello, and I am all colours, Sam," is also sometimes misrepresented as "Hello, I am all colours, Sam." So what is this phrase, "Hello, and I am all colours, Sam"? And what does the report mean about the words not being in a regular sequence? We of course didn't see the written text, so we can't tell what order the words were written in, and the phrase itself doesn't sound too out of the ordinary. But if the entity doesn't have a name, what else could this phrase mean? There's this all-important comma here. This suggests that he was referring to the kids as Sam, and not himself. The well-known phrase, "Play it again, Sam," from the 1942 film Casablanca, has this same comma. The speaker is referring to somebody else and not to himself. Although in fact nobody ever actually says "play it again, Sam" in that film. In that famous piano scene, Ilsa leans on the piano and says "play it once, Sam." But again, there's the comma. An entity not familiar with the concept of names might also use san as some generic term. It puts me in mind actually of the Japanese honorific san, for example. Maybe the sound Sam is what these entities use to denote the end of a sentence, used in place of a sound from its own language that has got no direct English translation. Maybe the entity just stopped writing halfway through a word because it realised it could just speak to the kids instead. Either way, I do not think this entity's name was Sam, even though that's what it has become known as over the years. It said it has no name. Was it perhaps some sort of alien? Some interdimensional entity? Maybe some form of synthetic life form? A shared hallucination? Or was it just a weirdo in the woods? If we leap into the more exciting of those options, the alien or the interdimensional, then maybe we should pause and ask, how would such a being communicate? What would this thing's idea of communication be? It chose to communicate verbally, through a microphone first, and then through writing, and then through speech without the microphone. In the first instance, the question, "Hello, are you still there?" was not met with an answer by the kids, so I would suggest that the entity then began using writing because it perhaps thought that spoken communication didn't work. Then, upon the children asking questions, it realised it could just talk to them. There's also the possibility that it didn't want the phrase written in the book to be heard by anyone, and therefore wrote it down instead. What if this being's method of communication is usually more telepathic or abstract or synesthetic? The written message, "Hello, and I am all colours, Sam," suggests that the entity may have been trying to use a form of symbolic communication. The unconventional word order that's mentioned suggests that it might not have been fully familiar with human language structures. After the written message, the entity communicated verbally without moving its lips. This could imply a form of telepathic communication or direct transmission of thoughts. The reference to all colours might indicate a broader spectrum of communication that goes beyond verbal or written language. This could involve visual signals, light patterns, or other sensory inputs that the humans might interpret as colours. Such a form of communication could encompass the entire light spectrum, including ultraviolet or infrared, which humans can't see but might perceive in some extraordinary experiences. The mention of all colours could also refer to dimensional characteristics, implying that the entity exists in, or can perceive, multiple dimensions. In some theoretical physics models, for example, higher dimensions could involve properties and phenomena not visible or understandable in our three-dimensional world. The entity might have been trying to convey its multidimensional nature using the concept of colours as a metaphor. The concept of synesthesia, where one sensory experience involuntarily triggers another, could indeed offer interesting evolutionary benefits, and it might have influenced the communication method of the Sandown Spaceman entity. Synesthesia could enhance an individual's ability to integrate and process information from multiple sensory modalities. This could lead to more holistic and nuanced perceptions of the environment, potentially aiding in navigation, for example, or foraging and detecting other entities. People with synesthesia often have better memory recall due to the strong associative links between different sensory inputs. This could be advantageous for remembering locations, resources, social interaction, or complex methods of traversing galaxies or dimensions. An entity with synesthetic abilities might process and interpret signals in a more complex and integrated way, possibly enabling more sophisticated forms of communication. For the Sandown Spaceman, this could mean using colours, sounds, and other sensory inputs in an interconnected manner to convey information. Considering the idea that all colours might relate to different dimensions, it's possible that the Sandown Spaceman's description of itself could be part of a broader system where entities from various dimensions identify with different colour combinations. Colours might serve as identifiers for different dimensions. Entities might use specific colour combinations to denote their origin or the dimension that they are currently interacting with. This could be a way to communicate their unique characteristics or abilities tied to their dimensional nature. It's food for thought, certainly. But what about its general appearance? Why 3 fingers and 3 toes? The 3-toed feature could be an adaptation specific to the entity's home environment. It might be quite different from ours. This physical trait could imply an origin from a different planet or dimension where different evolutionary pressures led to this particular morphology. The number 3 could have symbolic significance or a specific function in the entity's physiology or perhaps technology. For example, it might be related to a form of balance or locomotion suited to its environment, or it could be part of a bioengineered design if the entity is a product of some advanced technology. Having fewer toes might reduce the metabolic cost of growing, maintaining and regrowing such extremities. This could be beneficial in environments where resources are scarce or accidents involving the loss of extremities are common. The scarcity of resources idea could be backed up by the Sandown Spaceman saying that he only eats the berries off the trees and that the river water is drinkable when it's cleaned. If the entity uses its feet for manipulating objects or tools, 3 strong, well-adapted toes might be more effective than a larger number of smaller, less powerful ones. Although we don't see evidence of it doing this, but the feet were bare, so maybe that's because they are actually used to manipulate objects. The toes could also have specialised sensory functions, helping the entity sense vibrations, temperature, or other environmental factors. The same could be supposed of having 3 fingers, but then the hand was gloved, so we don't know that it only had 3 fingers. It might have just seemed that way. Was it wearing a mask? The entity was described with a face featuring triangular eyes, a square nose and motionless yellow lips. These features suggest a mask rather than a natural face, especially given the non-moving lips and the artificial appearance of the facial features. The mask included round markings on paper-white cheeks and a fringe of red hair along the forehead, further contributing to the notion of an artificial, constructed appearance. This might indicate that the mask served a specific purpose, maybe protection, communication, or some other function. With a mask, the entity would lack the ability to convey emotions through facial expressions, a large part of human communication. This would make its own communication methods relying more heavily on other forms such as written messages, body language, or possibly telepathic transmission. The mask might serve to protect the entity from environmental hazards, including atmospheric conditions, pathogens, or even psychological effects of interacting with humans. The mask could be intended to obscure the entity's true appearance, either to prevent recognition or to create a specific image or persona for interactions. In some cultures, masks play a significant role in rituals or social functions. The entity's mask might actually have been a similar cultural or symbolic significance. The entity's unusual and colourful attire might also have had such cultural significance. It might be a protective suit designed to shield it from Earth's environment. But then again, its feet were bare, weren't they? Then the specific design elements, such as the wooden antenna and the pointed hat, could serve functional purposes, possibly related to communication or navigation or sensory data collection. What about those triangular eyes? Well, in many cultures, the triangle is a symbol of strength and stability, so the triangular eyes might symbolise these qualities, reflecting its nature or the characteristics of its species or whatever it happens to be. Triangles are also often associated with mystical and esoteric traditions. They can represent the Trinity and enlightenment, or the connection between physical and spiritual realms. This might suggest the entity has a deeper, possibly spiritual significance, or operates on a level beyond ordinary physical existence. There might have been an adaptation to provide a wider field of vision, or to enhance depth perception maybe. Triangular eyes might allow the entity to see more effectively in its own environment. The shape of the eyes might be designed to filter light differently than round or oval eyes, possibly offering advantages in seeing under specific conditions such as low light or high glare environments potentially. The eyes might not be purely biological, and they don't sound biological. Again, it sounds like some sort of mask, so maybe they incorporate technological enhancements that use the triangular shape for advanced functions, for like detecting energy fields maybe, or communication signals. And what about the siren? Well, the siren noise could have been generated by a power source or machinery used by the entity. It had claimed that it had just finished making this hut. This could include a generator or some form of advanced technology that powers its metallic hut or other devices. The loudness and mechanical nature of the sound might indicate significant energy output or activity. If this entity's hut or its equipment had moving parts possibly, or mechanisms, then the siren noise might be a byproduct of its operation, similar to the sounds made by big engines and heavy machinery. Could have been an alert or a beacon to communicate with other entities, or as a warning signal. Such a sound might be used to signal the entity's presence, or deter intruders, or to coordinate with other beings or devices. The siren noise might be associated with interdimensional travel, or the opening and closing of a wormhole. The sound could be an auditory manifestation of this energy or disturbance involved in such a process. This explanation would align with a theory that the entity and its hut existed maybe in a sort of bubble of alien reality. I mean, those two workmen acted as if nothing was happening, didn't they? It could have been a natural phenomenon misinterpreted by the kids. It might have been the sound of wind or water or other environmental things interacting with the entity's structure, or the trees, for example. Or maybe it was just feedback from this microphone that he had. Why was it under a bridge? The obvious parallels to the troll under the bridge trope here are as plain as day, aren't they? But what else might it have been doing? We don't know the size of the bridge, and we don't know how close to the water the underside of the bridge is. I can't see a bridge on the maps for this area either. I'm tempted to go and take a trip down there and have a look myself. The area under the bridge might have provided temporary shelter from the elements, or a concealed place to just have a rest or conduct activities without being easily observed. The bridge might be located near a portal or some sort of vortex that this entity uses to travel between dimensions. This could explain why it was found in such an unusual and specific place. Certain locations on Earth are believed to have energetic anomalies or ley lines. The bridge area might be one such location, making it significant for interdimensional activity. The bridge might be a strategic point for observing human activity. The entity could study human behaviour interaction from a hidden vantage point. When it emerged from the bridge, it dropped a book, which suggests to me it was writing something in the book or reading the book. The contents of the book weren't described in detail by the children, so it's unclear what kind of book it was, but given the context, it could have been a manual, a journal, or some form of written communication tool. There's no specific mention in the available accounts of whether the book was ruined by the water. However, the entity did retrieve it, suggesting it valued the book, and perhaps indicating it was salvageable or protected, possibly, in some way. The book might have been used by the entity to communicate. It could contain symbols, diagrams, or writings meant for interaction with humans or perhaps other entities, like some sort of interdimensional phrase book. It could be a record of observations or a journal documenting interactions and experiences. If the entity is a researcher or an observer, the book might hold important data. It might contain instructions or information relevant to the entity's tasks or technology. After retrieving the book, the entity did return to the hut, so this action might indicate that the hut was some sort of base of operations or a place where it kept important items, and returning the book to the hut could also suggest that the entity needed to secure the book, possibly indicating that it's quite important. Could the hut have been some sort of craft? The detailed explanation of the interior, and specifically the pattern of dials, indicates a technological setup. This is consistent with what one might expect in a craft, designed for habitation or operation rather than a simple hut. The absence of windows might imply that the structure wasn't meant for long-term habitation, and it fits the idea of a temporary or mobile craft designed for specific tasks. The fact that the hut could not be found by the father when he later visited the site might suggest that it had the capability to move or become concealed. The use of a siren-like noise could be related to the operation of a craft, either as a form of propulsion or signalling or some other side effect of its power source. It might be that the hut is actually a mobile base for the entity to explore and observe human activity discreetly. There's just so many questions that arise, and so many possibilities. I really love thinking about this one and discussing it. But here's one final, glaringly obvious thing to mention. This information was provided by a Mr. Y. So is it really just a mystery? What do you think about this one? You let me know in the comments below, please. Hit the like button, it's the thumbs up button in the corner there, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. And please share this video with your friends and all that good YouTubey stuff. Bye for now.